Factoring polynomials completely. To factor a polynomial with 4 terms, group the terms first. Factor the GCF out of each pair of terms. Look for and factor out common binomial factor. This product is called factoring by grouping. So, kind of think that the first thing you need to see is, first, if you have 4 terms, okay? If you have 4 terms, group into binomials. Remember, binomials are 2 terms, correct? Look for GCFs of each of those of each of those pairs that you've created, and then continue factoring completely in case you miss something, okay? So this is factoring by grouping. So let's take a look at next slide to see how it's done. So if you can see, it's factoring by grouping. We have x cubed in A. We have x cubed plus 3x squared plus 2x plus 6. We can see here that we can group. We have 4 terms, so we can group this into 2 binomials. Here, x cubed plus 3x squared and 2x plus 6. I can factor out on that first one there an x squared, correct? Because I have x cubed and x squared, I could take out an x squared. And I'm left with inside x plus 3. Then on the second one, the GCF will be a2. So I'm left with inside of it x plus 3. So my final answer will be x squared plus 2 times x plus 3. B, I have 4 terms as well. X squared plus y plus x plus xy. I'm going to group my x together and y y's together. 2 binomials, remember. So I'm going to have x squared plus x. Okay, so I'm done with that. Plus y plus xy. On this first one, I could factor out an x. And I'm left with x plus 1. And here, in the second one, I can factor out y. And I'm left with 1 plus x. So my final answer is going to be x plus y times x plus 1. Notice that even though this is not in the same order as this, remember with adding 1 plus x is the same as x plus 1. Do not do this. If that would have been a subtraction, you cannot rearrange it that way. You have to keep it the way it is when it's subtraction. Factoring out completely. In this first A, I have 3x cubed plus 6x squared minus 18. X. The GCF and this trinomial will be 3x. So I'm left with x squared plus 2x minus 6. Now I know that there's nothing multiplied together, which C is negative 6, correct? C is negative 6. Let me put it in another color so we can see. C is negative 6. No 2 numbers multiplied together and then added, and when added will give me positive 2. So this trinomial is unfactorable. So this polynomial is completely factored completely. And that's your final answer. In B, I have 7x to the 4th power minus 28x squared. I can factor the GCF of 7 and 28 will be 7 and x4 to the power 4 and x squared. I could take out an x squared and be left inside with x squared minus 4. And I can continue factoring this out because this is the square. And I know the square of 4 is going to be its perfect square, correct? 7x squared times x squared minus 2 to the power of 2, which is its 2 squared. And my answer, I could continue factoring it out. My answer is going to be 7x squared times x minus 2 times x plus 4. That's your final answer. Remember that when you have a minus inside, that means you're going to have a positive and a negative. Solving an equation by factoring completely. So we know the word equation. That means I need to solve and find. Okay, I'm finding the variable or even variables. Okay, so we have 2x cubed plus 8x squared equals 10x. Before I factor and look for GCF, I'm going to bring over that 10x over here. So that means I'm subtracting it. So I'm going to have 2x cubed plus 8x minus 10x. Remember, you are trying to cancel it out. Equals 0. And I can see that here I'm going to have the GCF 2, 8, and 10 will be 2 and also 1x. So it's going to be 2x on the outside. And I'm left inside with x squared plus 4x minus 5 equals 0. And this trinomial, I can see that c is negative 5. So what two factors, when multiplied together, but added, will give me positive 4. I have 5 and 1 with 1 being negative 1. Because when I add that, that gives me 4, which this is my b. Remember, this is b. So I'm left with 2x times x plus 5 times x minus 1 equals 0. I'm still solving. I just found first in factor form. So we have 2x equals 0, x plus 5 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0. If I divide by 2, my first x is going to be 0. My second x, if I subtract 5 from both sides, I'm left with x equals negative 5. That's my second x. And if I add 1 to both sides, I'm left with x equals 1. So my final answers are x equals 0, x equals negative 5, and x equals 1. Here we're going to practice factor the polynomial by grouping. So number 1, I have a cubed plus 3a squared plus a plus 3. I can group from right there a cubed and 3a squared plus a plus 3. So I take out a squared here, and I'm be left inside with a plus 3 plus a plus 3 cannot be simplified more, well, factor out more, so I could just take out a 1, and I'm left with a plus 3. Remember, and originally, there's an imaginary, think about why the 1, because there's an imaginary 1 in front of your a, correct? So that's why it's plus 1. And it really doesn't do anything, because anything multiply with 1 here, you're still going to get a plus 3. Correct? So your final answer is going to be a squared plus 1 times a plus 3. Number 2, I'm going to put my y's together and my x together. So I already know these two are the only ones with x. So I'm going to have this is number 2. Y squared plus 2y plus 2x plus yx. Can factor our y out here, and I'm going to have y plus 2 plus x times 2 plus y. My final answers are y plus x times y plus 2. Remember, I could rearrange that and it's still the same. Number 3, factor the polynomial completely. I'm going to have 3x cubed minus 12x. I know that I can take out a 3 and an x, and I'm left with x squared minus 4. And I know that the inside, I can continue factoring out. So I'm left with 3x times x squared minus 2 squared. Remember, I'm just rewriting. That's a perfect square. So my final answer is going to be 3. And this is a what? Minus sign. So I'm going to have a plus and a minus. My answer is going to be 3x times x plus 2 and x minus 1. Number 4, I have 2y cubed minus 12y squared plus 18y. The GCF to this 2, 12, and 18 is 2. And I also could take out a y. So I'm left inside with y squared minus 6y plus 9. And remember, with the perfect square, I know y is perfect squared here, and 9 is also a perfect square. And I can divide 6 into 2. So my answer will be, and this is positive, so it means C is positive, so it means that, and B is negative. Both of them are going to be negative. So my final answer will be 2y times y minus 3 squared is my final answer. Number 5, I have m cubed minus 2m squared minus 8m. The only thing that I can take out here will be GCF of m, right? So I'm going to have m and left inside with m squared minus 2m minus 8. Now I know 8 is not a perfect square, so with two factors and when multiplied together gives me negative 8, because C is negative 8, right out up here. But at the same time will give me, when added, negative 2. I can write 4 and 2, because I know the 4 times 2 gives me 8, and 4 minus 2 will give me also 2, or even plus, right? Which is 4 plus negative 2, or negative 4 plus 2. This is negative, so that means that 4 has to be negative, correct? So my final answer is going to be m times n minus 4 times n minus 2. Here it says solve the equation. And I already know that there's equal signs and each one of them to equal to 0. So we're looking for our variables. Solving in this case for W for 6, X for 7, and C for 8. We might have more than one, but let's work them out first. Number 6, we have W cubed minus 8W squared plus 16W equals 0. I make this smaller so that it can fit. Minus 8W squared plus 16W equals 0. On this first one, I can take out the W, correct? And I'm left with W squared. Sorry, this move. Yes, W squared minus 8W plus 16 equals 0. So if I have C there as positive and the negative inside of B, so and what two factor multiplied together gives me 16, but negative 8 will be negative 4 plus negative 4, correct? That gives me positive 16. So my answer is going to be W times W minus 4 squared equals 0. I work this out. The first one will be W equals 0. This is, again, remember, repeated roots, correct? Because it's squared. I have W minus 4 equals 0. And I add 4 to both sides, and my answer are W equals 0 and W equals 4. Number 7, I have x cubed minus 25x equals 0. Could bring out an x and be left with x squared minus 25 equals 0. If I was to rewrite this 25, I know it's a perfect square, so I'm going to have x times x squared minus 5 to the power of 2 equals 0. That's a minus, so that means that I'm going to have a positive and a negative. So I'm going to be left with x times x plus 5 times x minus 5 equals 0. First one I have x equals 0, x plus 5 equals 0, x, I'm going to write it down here, x minus 5 equals 0. My first one is x equals 0. I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. X equals negative 5. I'm going to add 5 on that last one. And my last answer is x equals positive 5. And 8, without rewriting it, I can see, let me zoom it here, that I could take away c, correct? So I'm going to have c on the outside. I'm left with c squared minus 7c plus 12 equals 0. If c is positive, okay, which is the positive 12 here, that means that both of them are going to be negative inside, so I'm going to end up with a square. So what two numbers multiplied together gives me 12, but when added gives me negative 7. I'm going to have 4 and 3. Are they both going to be negative? Yes, because if I was to add these, I'm going to get negative 7, which is my B. So my answer is going to be C times C minus 4 times C minus 3 equals 0. C equals 0. C minus 4 equals 0. C minus 3 equals 0. I'm going to add 4 to both sides. C equals 4, and I'm going to add 3 to both sides. C equals 3. So my answer are C equals 4. Let me do another color so we can see it. Now notice I didn't get a perfect square. Why? Because 12 is not a perfect square. If 12 would have been a perfect square, remember that B also has to be divided by 2 in order for the trinomial to be perfect squared. So in the concept summary, these are guidelines for factoring polynomials completely, okay? So think of greatest common factors. Okay, think of greatest common factor. Look for differences of two squares or perfect square trinomial. And also look for trinomials in products where you're able to have a positive and negative, or positive and positive, or negative and negative. And you can also factor polynomial with grouping with 4 terms, okay, by grouping.